A pair of weary eyes can pierce through noise, pride, and even time itself. What began as a glance on a quiet street turned into a test of loyalty, sacrifice, and the kind of trust that can only be earned through pain. This story isn't about chance. It's about a bond that would bring an entire town to tears. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and share in the comments where you're watching from and what moment speaks to you most. Officer Michael Turner was not a man easily unsettled, yet the events of that afternoon would mark the beginning of something he could never have prepared for. Michael was a black police officer in his mid-30s, known around town as a man who worked hard to bridge the divide between uniform and community. Someone who carried himself with quiet authority, but also with an open heart. That day, after finishing his patrol shift, he stopped at a small diner on Main Street, a place he often visited to grab a sandwich before heading back to the precinct. It was a cold afternoon, the kind where the wind stung cheeks and people walked faster than usual just to get indoors. Michael unwrapped his turkey sandwich and sat on the diner's steps to enjoy it quickly before returning to work. But before he could take a proper bite, he felt a presence, a gaze pressing into him, not threatening, but so heavy it demanded his attention. When he looked up, he saw the dog. The German Shepherd stood just beyond the curb, its coat dull patches missing ribs visible beneath the skin. The animal looked broken, the kind of broken that told stories of both hunger and heartbreak. Yet it was the eyes that caught Michael Amber steady and filled with something he couldn't quite name. They were not the eyes of a mere stray. They were weary eyes, eyes that had seen too much. The dog did not bark or whine, did not shuffle closer like most hungry animals would. It just stood trembling slightly, locked onto the sandwich in Michael's hand but refusing to move closer. Michael felt a sting in his chest. He had seen eyes like that before, on men who had returned from war, sitting alone on benches outside the bus station, staring at the world, but no longer truly part of it. He broke off a small piece of his sandwich and set it on the concrete between them. He expected the shepherd to rush forward, devour it, and maybe retreat again. Instead, the dog approached slowly, its paws hesitant each step, looking like a calculation between need and fear. When it reached the food, it sniffed, nudged it, and to Michael's astonishment, pushed the piece back toward him. The officer blinked, confused. Why would a starving dog push away food? But in that silent exchange, he understood. This wasn't rejection. This was a test. The dog's eyes seemed to say, "I don't want your pity. I don't want scraps tossed like I don't matter. If you give me something, mean it." Michael sat down, fully ignoring the cold pavement beneath him. He tore off a larger piece this time and placed it closer to himself, deliberately not watching the dog. He pretended to study the street, letting the shepherd make the choice. After several tense moments, the dog lowered his head and began to eat. He didn't gulp it down like an animal crazed by hunger. He chewed slowly, savoring each bite tail, twitching just faintly before going still again. Michael noticed how the act wasn't just about filling a stomach. It was as though the dog was preserving dignity, showing that he might be starving, but would not lose self-respect. A teenager walking by scoffed. "Look at that cop feeding strays like they're people." Michael ignored it. He wasn't just feeding a dog. He was acknowledging something deeper, though he couldn't put it into words yet. He reached out his hand slowly, palm up, offering no sudden moves. The shepherd tensed ears flat and growled faintly before stepping back. Michael kept his hand steady, his breathing calm, waiting. For a long moment, the dog just stared at him, torn between fear and longing. Then it turned and walked a few steps away, casting one last look back before disappearing around the corner. Michael sat in silence, his half-eaten sandwich forgotten. He knew what he had seen wasn't chance. This dog was different. He carried a paper bag with another sandwich, not because he was hungry, but because he hoped the shepherd might be there again. And he was. The dog appeared near the diner's trash bins, pawing quietly at a cardboard box for scraps, his frame just as thin as before, though his ears perked the moment Michael stepped into view. The officer crouched low, setting the bag beside him, tearing off a piece of turkey and holding it out. The shepherd hesitated, but eventually stepped closer, sniffing warily. That was when Michael noticed the marks. As the dog stretched its neck, the fur shifted, revealing a ring of scar tissue pressed deep into the skin. The flesh was darker, uneven, almost like a burn that had never healed right. Michael's heart sank. This wasn't just any stray scar. It was the unmistakable imprint of a collar worn too long, too tight. A cruel reminder that someone had chained this animal for years, perhaps neglecting him until his spirit broke. He whispered almost to himself, "What did they do to you, boy?" The dog flinched at the sound of his voice, but didn't back away this time, continuing to sniff before finally taking the food. Michael's hand shook as he pulled out more. He felt anger and sorrow mix inside his chest. He had seen too many people scarred by others' carelessness, too many forgotten souls treated like they were disposable. And now he saw the same truth written on the body of this German shepherd. As he sat there, a man passing by slowed, squinted at the dog, and muttered to no one in particular. "Well, I'll be damned. That's Rex." Michael's head snapped up. "You know him?" The man nodded, adjusting his cap. "Everyone did back in the day. He was trained K9, worked with Officer Henry Scott before Henry was killed. Dog got injured on a raid, shoulder messed up real bad. After that, they tossed him aside like yesterday's trash. Said he wasn't fit for duty anymore. Poor thing's been on the streets ever since." Michael blinked hard at his throat tight. Suddenly the dog wasn't just a stray. He had a name, a history, and more importantly, a betrayal behind those eyes. Rex, Michael whispered, testing the name. The shepherd's ears twitched slightly, recognition flickering in his gaze, though he stayed silent. The old man shook his head. Shameful what they did. He saved lives, and this is how it ends. Then he walked off, leaving Michael alone with Rex and the weight of the revelation. Michael thought about Officer Henry Scott. He remembered hearing the story years ago, the officer killed in the line of duty, leaving behind a grieving wife. And now the partner left behind was this dog discarded, when injured left to wander hungry streets with scars on his body and soul. It made Michael furious, but also resolute. He looked at Rex and spoke softly. "You deserved better. You're not done yet." Rex tilted his head uncertain, but did not move away. Michael reached out again, more firmly this time, fingers brushing the coarse fur near the scar. Rex stiffened, then shivered, but didn't retreat. That fragile tolerance meant more to Michael than he could explain. He felt the beginning of trust forming, built on shared pain. Michael thought about his own life, how being a black officer often felt like standing in two worlds, never fully accepted by either side, always carrying invisible marks of doubt and mistrust. He had worked for years to earn respect, to prove he belonged, but the scars from that struggle were real. In Rex's scars, he saw his own reflection. As the evening deepened, Michael knew he couldn't just leave Rex here, but he also understood he couldn't force the bond. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. He gathered his things, leaving half the sandwich on the ground, then stood and gave Rex a final look. "I'll be back tomorrow, partner," he said quietly, and began walking away. For a long moment, Rex did not move. Officer Michael Turner returned to Main Street with a sense of determination stronger than before, because after learning Rex's past, he could not shake the feeling that he had stumbled into a story much larger than himself. A story that tied the memory of a fallen officer to a forgotten animal left to fade into the shadows. The next afternoon, he brought more than just a sandwich. He carried a small container of cooked chicken he had picked up from the diner, thinking perhaps real meat would speak to the dog in a way that bread could not. He found Rex near the same alley where they had first met, sitting as if he had been waiting, though his posture was guarded. Michael crouched, opening the container, tearing pieces into small bites, extending them carefully. Rex approached with the same deliberate caution, but just as he reached Michael's hand, his ears shot up, body stiffening. Without warning, Rex spun and bolted down the alley, barking with sharp urgency that echoed off the brick walls. Michael's instincts kicked in, heart racing as he dropped the food and sprinted after him, expecting danger, maybe an ambush, or another group of loiterers up to no good. He reached the end of the narrow path, chest heaving, and froze at the sight before him. Behind a row of overturned trash cans, a small boy, no older than 7, sat curled into himself, his face streaked with dirt and tears, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. Rex was beside him, tail-low posture, protective rather than threatening. The shepherd nudged the child gently with his nose, then pressed his head against the boy's arm, as though telling him he was no longer alone. The boy flinched at first, but then reached out weakly, fingers tangling in the rough fur, a sob escaping his throat. Michael's heart clenched. He approached slowly, lowering himself to the boy's level voice, calm and steady. "Hey there, buddy. You're safe now. My name's Michael. Can you tell me yours?" The child shook his head, trembling too much to speak, his eyes wide with fear. Michael noticed the thin jacket hanging off his shoulders, not enough to fight the cold. He saw bruises on his wrist, old but visible. His gut twisted with anger at whoever had left this boy here. He pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around the child, then gently lifted him into his arms. The boy resisted for only a moment before sagging against Michael's chest, exhausted. Rex walked beside them, ears still alert, eyes scanning the alley as though daring anyone to approach. Michael whispered, "Good boy, Rex. You found him. You saved him." At the sound of his name, Rex's ears flicked, eyes meeting Michael's for a brief second, and in that moment, Michael swore he saw recognition, even pride. By the time Michael carried the boy to his patrol car parked on the street, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Curious eyes followed as he bundled the child in blankets and called dispatch, reporting a found minor in need of immediate care. Whispers rippled when people realized the dog walking at his side was the same stray they had seen wandering town for years. Some muttered in disbelief, others shook their heads, but a few nodded with respect. One elderly woman even murmured, "That dog's got more heart than most people I know." At the hospital, the boy was admitted quickly, doctors checking his condition. Social services were notified, but Michael stayed close until he was stable, unwilling to leave him alone. All the while, Rex waited outside the automatic doors, pacing anxiously, his gaze fixed on the building, as though he understood that his rescue was not yet complete. When Michael finally stepped outside, again exhausted but relieved, Rex rushed to him, tail wagging once before settling into a calmer stance. Michael crouched and scratched gently behind his ears, whispering, "You knew, didn't you? You heard him, smelled him something. You wouldn't leave until I followed." Rex leaned into his touch, not fully relaxed, but allowing the moment. For Michael, that acceptance meant everything. He thought again of the scars on Rex's neck, the betrayal of being discarded after giving loyalty, and yet here he was, still giving, still saving. The realization hit Michael hard. This dog was not defined by what had been taken from him, but by what he still chose to give. Later that evening, paperwork complete and the boy safe under temporary care, Michael sat in his patrol car, staring at the passenger seat. He imagined Rex sitting there, head out the window, finally riding where he belonged. But when he looked outside, Rex was gone, vanished back into the shadows of the town. Still, Michael felt no despair. Michael Turner could not shake the image of Rex guiding him to that lost boy, the way the shepherd had pressed his head against the child, as if to promise safety until help arrived. All night, Michael replayed it in his head, thinking of how a dog once abandoned and scarred could still summon the instinct to protect someone smaller, weaker, and utterly vulnerable. That morning, when he put on his uniform, he felt different, as though the badge on his chest carried not only his duty, but also the silent courage of the German shepherd who had chosen to trust him, if only for a moment. By late afternoon, Michael returned to Main Street again, carrying chicken in a paper bag. And for a while, he saw nothing but the ordinary rhythm of town life cars rolling slowly by, people ducking in and out of shops, teenagers laughing loudly on the sidewalk. Then out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Rex. The dog was limping slightly, his gait uneven, but he was heading straight toward Michael with determined steps. Something glinted between his jaws. Michael knelt immediately, calling softly, "Come here, Rex." The shepherd dropped the object at his boots and sat down chest-heaving, as though the short walk had taken all his energy. When Michael picked it up, he realized it was a badge. Old and rusted, the metal dulled by years of neglect, edges chipped, still carrying faint traces of soil. His brow furrowed as he wiped it against his uniform sleeve, revealing letters faintly engraved across the surface. The name struck him like a punch: Henry Scott. Michael's memory raced back to the story he had heard from the old man the day before. Henry Scott, the officer who had been killed in the line of duty. The same Henry whose canine partner was Rex. He stared at the badge, then back at the dog, whose amber eyes never left his face. "You kept this." Michael whispered, his throat tight. "All these years, you guarded his memory. It was unthinkable. For 20 years, Rex had lived without a handler, without a home, surviving on the streets. Yet here he was, delivering the proof of his past, as if he wanted Michael to understand fully who he was. Michael imagined Rex lying in alleys at night with that badge clutched between his paws, or burying it in the dirt and digging it back up whenever the loneliness grew too heavy, carrying it like a relic of a bond that had once defined his world. And now he had chosen to bring it to Michael, not to anyone else, but to him. A woman passing by slowed her steps, noticing the strange scene, and asked curiously, "Is that what I think it is?" Michael nodded, showing her the badge. Her face softened. "Henry was my cousin. He loved that dog like family. We always wondered what happened to his partner after the funeral. No one gave us answers." Her voice cracked, and she walked away quickly, hand to her mouth, clearly overcome. Michael crouched closer to Rex, his voice low but firm. "You never stopped being his partner, did you? You carried him with you every day. That's what makes you different." Rex leaned forward and touched his nose briefly to Michael's knee, then sat back again. For Michael, that simple gesture felt like a vow. He pocketed the badge, carefully promising silently that Henry Scott's memory would not fade, and that Rex would not have to carry it alone any longer. That evening back at the precinct, Michael cleaned the badge thoroughly with polish until the name gleamed again, though the rust never fully disappeared. He placed it on his desk and found himself staring at it long after the shift ended. Other officers teased him lightly, asking why he was so obsessed with an old piece of metal. But Michael didn't care. He felt a duty greater than paperwork or patrol routes. This was about restoring honor to a fallen comrade and to the partner left behind in silence. He thought about his own struggles as a black officer in a world where trust was often fractured, where belonging was always questioned. He saw in Rex a mirror, loyal, brave, discarded when no longer useful, yet refusing to let go of dignity or memory. He thought of the lost boy Rex had saved, the scar on his neck, and now this badge. Each piece painted a larger picture of resilience and silent endurance. The more Michael thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't let Rex slip back into the shadows again. He had to find a way to bring him in, to give him shelter and purpose, not just because Rex had earned it, but because the bond between them was already sealed by something deeper than chance. Before leaving for home, Michael slipped the badge into a small protective case and set it on his locker shelf, whispering to himself, "I'll carry it with you now, Rex. You've carried it long enough." Michael Turner returned to the station with the rusted badge still heavy in his pocket and Rex limping faithfully at his side. The events of the day had rattled him more than he wanted to admit, because he could not stop thinking about the weight of memory that dog had carried for 20 years, nor the way Rex had chosen to deliver it to him, not to anyone else, but to him. Michael's fellow officers noticed his new shadow, immediately exchanging curious looks as he brought the shepherd inside. A few raised eyebrows, some shook their heads, but Michael ignored them, determined to give Rex a safe space, even if just for one night. He found an old blanket and spread it in the corner of the common room, placing a bowl of water and leftover chicken beside it. At first, Rex paced ears, flicking nervously at every sound, unwilling to settle in the unfamiliar environment. Michael sat down near him, lowering himself slowly, keeping his body language calm. He pulled the badge from his pocket and placed it carefully on the floor between them, as if to say he respected Rex's past and would guard it now. Hours passed with paperwork and phone calls filling the background, but Rex never strayed far, always watching Michael. Near midnight, when the building grew quiet, Michael stretched out on the old couch, fatigue pressing down on him. He thought he would drift off alone, but then he felt a weight settle gently against his leg. Opening his eyes, he saw Rex had moved closer, cautiously at first, then with surprising certainty. The shepherd laid his head on Michael's lap, sighing deeply, eyes fluttering shut. For the first time since Michael had met him, Rex allowed himself to sleep, without fear, trusting this man to keep him safe. Michael sat frozen, emotions rising in his chest. He placed a tentative hand on the dog's head, feeling the coarse fur beneath his fingers, and whispered, "Rest easy, partner. I've got you now." He thought of the boy they had rescued, the scar around Rex's neck, the badge of a fallen officer, and realized that somehow all of those threads had tied together in this moment of quiet surrender. It was not just a dog seeking shelter. It was a soldier laying down his guard for the first time in years. The peace did not last long. A sudden clang echoed from the back hallway, snapping Rex awake in an instant. His ears shot up, his body tense, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Michael stood quickly, hand on his holster, moving toward the sound. An officer lounging nearby scoffed, rolling his eyes. "That mutt doesn't belong here, Turner. You bring in street trash, you get street trash behavior." He leaned back in his chair as if amused, but before he could finish his sneer, Rex bolted past him, growl rising into a bark that made everyone in the room sit up. Michael sprinted after him, heart pounding, as Rex skidded to a stop in front of the evidence room. The door was slightly ajar, the lock clearly tampered with. Inside, a masked figure was rifling through shelves, stuffing bags into a backpack. Before Michael could react, Rex lunged, knocking the intruder off balance. The man crashed into the wall, cursing, and tried to kick the dog away, but Rex held firm, teeth bared, snarling with a ferocity that froze the thief in place. Michael burst in, weapon drawn, shouting, "Police hands where I can see them." The man dropped the bag, immediately raising his trembling hands. Within minutes, backup arrived, handcuffs clicked, and the intruder was dragged out. Officers exchanged stunned looks, some still processing the fact that the station itself had been breached and that it had been Rex, the so-called stray, who had prevented the theft. The officer who had scoffed earlier avoided Michael's eyes, clearly embarrassed. Michael crouched down beside Rex, rubbing his neck, pride swelling in his chest. "Good boy," he whispered, voice thick. "You've still got it, haven't you? You were never just a stray. You were always meant for this," Rex panted, tail thumping faintly, his eyes glowing with something more than animal instinct. It was purpose reclaimed. Later, as reports were written and the thief processed, Michael sat back at his desk, Rex curled at his feet. He noticed how the dog's body finally relaxed fully, no longer pacing, no longer restless. It was as if catching that criminal had reminded him of who he was, not just a discarded animal, but a protector, a guardian who still had worth. Michael looked down at the rusted badge on his desk, then at the living, breathing partner at his feet, and made a decision. From this moment forward, Rex would not sleep on cold sidewalks or wander streets searching for scraps. He would belong not as property, not as a tool, but as family. Michael Turner could not stop thinking about the way Rex had caught the thief in the evidence room, the way the shepherd had thrown himself into danger without hesitation, proving to every doubter in the precinct that he was not just a stray, but a guardian who still carried the instincts of service deep in his bones. After that night, Rex was no longer dismissed quite so easily, though some still muttered under their breath about keeping a half-wild dog inside the station. For Michael, the choice was clear. He brought Rex along with him on patrols, testing how he would react outside the safety of the building, watching to see if the trust they had built could hold in the unpredictable rhythm of the streets. That Friday night, the town was quieter than usual, the moon hanging low and pale shadows stretching across deserted sidewalks. Michael drove slowly through his usual route, the police radio crackling softly in the background, while Rex sat in the passenger seat, his amber eyes scanning the dark with constant vigilance. Every now and then he sniffed the air, ears twitching, his body tense with an alertness that told Michael he was not simply along for the ride, but working as though something inside him had reignited. When they reached the industrial district on the edge of town, Rex suddenly stiffened his body, rigid eyes locked forward. Michael slowed, following his gaze to a large abandoned warehouse that had long been considered an empty relic of the town's past economy. Its windows were shattered graffiti covered the walls, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. Michael frowned. "What is it, boy?" Rex whined low in his throat, then barked once sharp and commanding. He pawed at the door handle as if urging Michael to stop. Trusting his partner's instincts, Michael parked the cruiser in the shadows and stepped out cautiously, Rex leaping down beside him. They moved quietly toward the warehouse, Michael's hand resting on his holster, the crunch of gravel loud in the still night. As they approached, he noticed faint light flickering inside, and voices carried on the wind. He crept closer, peering through a broken window, and what he saw made his stomach tighten. A group of men were inside, stacking boxes onto pallets, whispering hurriedly. Michael recognized the markings on the boxes, immediately stolen electronics that had been missing for weeks. His jaw clenched. This was the break the department had been waiting for. He radioed in softly requesting backup, but knew it would take time for others to arrive. He considered waiting, but before he could decide, one of the men looked up, suddenly spotting his shadow against the window. "Cops," the man shouted, and chaos erupted. Michael burst through the side door, weapon drawn, shouting, "Police! Drop everything and get down!" The men scattered, some diving for cover, others reaching for weapons. One raised a handgun, pointing directly at Michael. In that instant, Rex became a blur of motion, launching himself across the floor. His body slammed into the man's arm with force, the gun clattering to the ground before a shot could be fired. Snarling, Rex pinned the man down, teeth bared, inches from his face, forcing him to freeze in terror. Michael advanced quickly, cuffing the stunned suspect, his heart pounding. The others tried to flee, but backup arrived just in time, surrounding the building, corralling the thieves before they could escape into the night. Within minutes, the warehouse was secured, the stolen goods recovered, and the suspects in custody. Officers exchanged astonished looks, murmuring about how Michael's stray had just saved his life. Some clapped him on the shoulder, others bent to scratch Rex's ears, their skepticism finally melting into respect. Michael knelt beside his partner, rubbing his neck. "You did it again, Rex. You kept me alive." Rex licked his hand briefly, then sat tall, chest-heaving eyes burning with purpose. It was in that moment Michael realized the truth. Rex wasn't just surviving anymore. He was working again, reclaiming the role that had once defined him, proving that loyalty and courage didn't die just because someone else had given up on him. As they drove back to the station later that night, Michael glanced at Rex in the passenger seat. For the first time, the dog seemed to belong there. Head held high, ears relaxed, the weight of exile lifting from his frame. The raid at the warehouse had changed everything for Michael and for Rex, because it was no longer possible for the rest of the precinct to dismiss the shepherd as a stray. or as baggage from a past no one wanted to remember. After that night, whispers in the hall turned to nods of respect, and even the officers who once mocked the dog now greeted him with a pat on the head or a muttered "good boy." Michael knew the shift was fragile, but it was enough to prove Rex's worth. More importantly, it confirmed what Michael already knew: Rex was not done. He still had a calling, a purpose that had never left him despite the years of neglect. For several days, patrols were routine, quieter, almost peaceful, and Michael allowed himself to believe that maybe the worst of their challenges had passed. But fate was not finished testing them. It happened late on a Saturday night. Michael and Rex were driving their usual patrol when a call came through the radio about an armed robbery in progress at a gas station 2 blocks away. Without hesitation, Michael flipped the sirens on, heart pounding as he sped toward the location. The parking lot was nearly empty, neon lights buzzing above the storefront, the glass door shattered, alarms wailing. Michael exited the cruiser, cautiously weapon drawn, Rex leaping to his side, body tense and ready. Inside the store, he spotted 2 suspects, grabbing cash from the register, stuffing bills into bags, their movements frantic. One of them shouted when he saw the officer bolting for the back door. The other raised his weapon, aiming directly at Michael. "Police, drop it," Michael barked, but the man ignored him, firing a shot that whizzed past his head, shattering a display. Michael returned fire, forcing the gunman to duck behind a shelf, while Rex growled, muscles coiled like springs. Then the second suspect burst out of the back door, sprinting into the alley. Michael made the split-second decision to pursue, chasing him into the darkness. Rex was right beside him, paws pounding the pavement, breath steaming in the cold night air. They rounded a corner where the suspect tripped, stumbled, then spun with his gun raised. Time seemed to slow. Michael saw the muzzle flash the bullet slicing through the air toward his chest. But before it could reach him, Rex lunged body, colliding with Michael's side, taking the impact of the shot in his shoulder. The shepherd collapsed onto the ground with a yelp of pain that tore through Michael's soul. Michael screamed, diving to the ground, his weapon trained on the suspect. He fired a controlled shot, hitting the man in the leg, sending him sprawling. Michael kicked the weapon away and cuffed him with shaking hands before turning back to Rex. Blood was spreading across the concrete, dark and fast, soaking into the fur that had once been thick and proud. Michael dropped to his knees, pressing his hands over the wound, his fingers slick with warmth. His vision blurred with tears as he whispered desperately, "Don't you dare leave me, buddy. Not like this. You've carried enough pain. Let me carry you now. Please, Rex, stay with me." Rex's eyes fluttered, his breathing shallow, but he leaned his head weakly into Michael's palm, as if to reassure him, even in agony. The sirens of backup units grew louder, flashing lights bouncing off the alley walls as officers poured in, securing the scene and calling for medics. But Michael barely noticed them. His entire world had narrowed to the shepherd bleeding in his arms. "We're not done, you hear me?" he murmured, rocking slightly as though his voice alone could anchor Rex to this world. "You saved me once, twice, 3 times. Now it's my turn. I won't let them discard you again. Not while I'm breathing." Medics rushed forward, urging Michael to move aside, but he refused until they pried his hands gently from Rex's wound, sliding the dog onto a stretcher. Michael followed close, never more than a step away, ignoring the officers who told him to take a breath to calm down. He couldn't calm down. The thought of losing Rex, of watching this loyal partner fade after finally finding trust again, was unbearable. As they loaded Rex into the emergency vehicle, Michael climbed in beside him, gripping his paw tightly. The shepherd's eyes opened briefly, searching for him, and Michael bent low, whispering, "I'm right here. I'm not letting go. You're my family now." The ride to the animal hospital felt endless, every second a torment. Michael pressed his forehead against Rex's, praying, silently begging for a miracle. When they finally arrived, the veterinary staff rushed Rex into surgery, but Michael refused to wait outside quietly. He paced the hall hand's trembling uniform stained with his partner's blood. Other officers arrived, some trying to console him, but Michael could not listen. His mind replayed the moment again and again. The muzzle flashed the impact, the sound of Rex crying out. He had seen men shot before, had held dying officers in his arms. But this felt different, rawer, as if part of himself had been torn open. Hours passed without word. Michael sat slumped in a chair, head in his hands, whispering prayers he wasn't even sure he believed in anymore. When a nurse finally emerged to update him, her words were grim. The bullet damaged his shoulder badly. "We've stopped the bleeding, but it's going to be a fight." Michael nodded numbly, forcing himself to stand to be strong because Rex had fought his entire life. He couldn't stop now. He pressed his palm to the glass window of the recovery room where Rex lay hooked to machines, his chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. "You're not alone anymore," Michael whispered. "Not this time. You won't wake up in the cold or the dark." The hours after the surgery dragged like days, and Michael Turner remained by Rex's side through every moment, refusing to be pushed out of the waiting area, even when exhaustion weighed down his body like chains. He had scrubbed Rex's blood from his hands, but he could not erase the red stains on his uniform, nor the memory of the shepherd's body collapsing into his arms after the shot. News of the shooting traveled quickly through the town, faster than Michael expected. By the next morning, when he stepped outside the hospital for fresh air, he found dozens of people gathered quietly, holding candles, some kneeling in prayer. Their faces reflected grief and hope, all at once, and the sight made his chest tighten. Rex, once dismissed as nothing but a stray, was now the center of the town's heartbeat. Children clutched hand-drawn pictures, scribbles of a German shepherd with angel wings, or a police badge hanging around his neck. Some drawings were taped onto the hospital's doors, alongside letters written in shaky handwriting that said things like, "Please get well, hero," and "Thank you for saving Officer Turner." Michael read them in silence, overwhelmed by the realization that Rex had touched more lives than he knew. People who had never met the shepherd still felt the weight of his sacrifice, as if his courage belonged to all of them. Michael stood among them, listening to strangers share stories he had never heard, about how they had seen Rex wandering the streets for years, often sitting by the bus stop in the rain, or standing guard near the schoolyard fence as children walked home. They admitted they had pitied him, but none had truly stepped in to change his fate. Now they looked at Michael as though he was the one who had given them all a second chance, though he knew it wasn't him at all. It was Rex. The shepherd had chosen time and again to give what little he had left, and that choice had united them all. As night fell, the crowd grew larger, the glow of candles painting warm halos against the cold hospital walls. Michael sat on the steps, head bowed, Rex's badge in his hand, polished, but still scarred with rust. That was when he noticed an elderly woman making her way slowly through the crowd. Her hair was silver, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched something close to her chest. She stopped in front of him, her eyes glistening as she held out a faded photograph. Michael took it gently, and his breath caught. The photo showed a man in uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, kneeling beside a young Rex, his fur bright, his eyes clear, his posture proud. The man's arm was draped around the shepherd, his smile wide with pride. Beneath the photo, written in ink now blurred with age, was the name Officer Henry Scott. Michael looked up, his throat tight. The woman's voice shook as she whispered, "Henry was my husband. He loved that dog more than words could say. They were partners through everything." When Henry died, Rex stayed by his casket, refusing to move. I always wondered if Rex would ever find someone to stay by his side, the way Henry did. Now I see he has. Tears blurred Michael's vision as he handed the photo back, but she pressed it into his hand, firmly shaking her head. "Keep it. He belongs with you now and with Rex. They were a team once, and now so are you." Michael couldn't speak. He could only nod, gripping the photograph as though it were the most sacred gift he had ever received. Later that night, he returned to Rex's side, placing the photo and the badge together on the small table beside the recovery bed. Rex stirred weakly, opening his eyes for a brief moment. Michael leaned close, showing him the photograph, whispering, "Look, buddy, Henry's still here, and so are you. You've never been forgotten." Rex's tail flicked faintly, his eyes closing again, but Michael swore there was a softness there, a peace that came from knowing he was not alone in his fight. The days that followed brought more vigils, more notes, more people coming together in a way the town hadn't seen in years. It was as if Rex's battle for survival had reminded everyone of something they had forgotten, that loyalty, sacrifice, and love still mattered even in the smallest of places. Children wrote letters addressed directly to Rex, some left toys beside the door, stuffed animals in his likeness, while older residents brought food and blankets for Michael, urging him to keep his strength. The hospital staff, once annoyed at Michael's refusal to leave, now made space for him, offering him coffee, sometimes sitting with him in quiet solidarity. It became clear that Rex was no longer just Michael's partner. He was theirs, the town's a symbol of what it meant to give everything without expecting anything in return. And in that realization, Michael felt something inside him shift. He had always walked a difficult line as a black officer in a small town, balancing expectations, dealing with suspicion, often carrying the weight of proving himself twice over. But here with Rex, that line blurred. The town didn't see his badge or his skin the way they once did. They saw the bond between man and dog, and through that, they saw something purer, something worth believing in. Standing in the glow of candlelight one evening, Michael whispered to himself, "You've changed everything, Rex." Michael Turner had seen plenty of life and death moments in his career, but none cut as deep as watching Rex struggle on that operating table. The town had already rallied around the shepherd, leaving flowers, notes, drawings, and prayers outside the hospital, but inside it was only Michael, the medical staff, and the fragile rise and fall of Rex's chest. Hours bled into each other as surgeons worked tirelessly, sweat dripping down their foreheads, hands moving with precision, but the bullet had torn through muscle and bone in Rex's shoulder, leaving behind devastation that was almost impossible to repair. Michael stood in the corner, fists clenched the rusted badge and faded photo of Henry Scott in his pocket, whispering silent prayers and promises that he would not let this animal be abandoned again. As dawn broke, a weary vet stepped back, muttering under his breath, "It's hopeless. He's not strong enough." Michael's rage exploded. He slammed his fist onto the metal table so hard that instruments rattled. His voice cracked as he shouted, "You don't know Rex. He doesn't quit. He's fought through more than any of us could imagine. Don't you dare give up on him." The staff froze, stunned by his outburst. But Michael didn't care. He stormed to Rex's side, pressing his hand firmly against the shepherd's paw, leaning close so Rex could hear him, even if he was drifting between worlds. "Listen to me, partner," he whispered hoarsely. "I know you're tired. I know you've carried scars and hunger and loneliness, but this isn't where it ends. Not here, not now. You're not alone anymore. You've got me. You've got this town, and we need you." For long, unbearable minutes, the machines beeped erratically. Rex's breath shallow, the team exchanging grim looks that screamed defeat. Michael refused to move. He gripped harder, closing his eyes, speaking with a trembling intensity that filled the room. "Henry loved you once, but he's gone. Now it's me, and I won't let you go through this alone. You have a new family, Rex. Fight for us the way you've always fought." And then it happened. Just as one nurse was about to call the time, Rex's paw twitched against Michael's hand. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but real. His chest rose with a slightly stronger breath. His eyes fluttered, half opening, searching wildly as if trying to make sense of the blur around him. Michael leaned closer, tears flooding his eyes, whispering, "I'm here, right here." and Rex's gaze found him. Those amber eyes focusing on the one face he had chosen to trust. The heart monitor, which had been sputtering dangerously low, steadied into a stronger rhythm. The room erupted, nurses gasping, surgeons rushing back to their positions, working with renewed energy, as if Rex's spark had reignited theirs too. One whispered, "Unbelievable." He chose to fight. Michael kissed the shepherd's head, voice shaking. "That's it, buddy. Show them who you are. Show them you're more than a stray. You're a warrior." The hours stretched longer, but every second Rex held on gave Michael hope. He never left his side, feeding him strength, with every word gripping his paw, as if it was the only thing tethering Rex to life. Outside the window, the glow of candles continued as townspeople kept their vigil, their voices drifting softly through the cold air as they sang hymns and whispered prayers. Inside, that chorus seemed to seep through the walls, reaching Rex, telling him he was not forgotten, that his fight mattered. Michael realized it wasn't just his voice Rex had heard, but the collective voice of an entire community that had finally recognized his worth. Hours later, when the vet finally removed his gloves, shaking his head in disbelief, he said quietly, "He shouldn't have survived this." But he did, because he wanted to. Michael dropped into the chair, covering his face with his hands as sobs tore from him, not of despair, but of relief so overwhelming it shook him. Rex was still critical, but alive, and that was enough. Later, when the room was cleared and Rex was settled in recovery, Michael sat beside him, exhaustion heavy, but spirit unbroken. He laid the photo of Henry Scott and the polished badge on the table near Rex's head. "He would be proud of you," Michael whispered. The days following Rex's miraculous survival became a blur of healing and hope. And Michael Turner never left his side, keeping vigil at the hospital until the shepherd was strong enough to stand on his own legs again. The town that had once walked past Rex without a second thought now seemed to revolve around him, neighbors visiting the hospital to drop off flowers and blankets, children coloring pictures of him as a superhero, even officers who once mocked him now volunteering to walk him outside during his first fragile steps. When news spread that Rex had survived the bullet and the surgery cheers erupted across the small community, church bells rang at noon, and a petition began circulating almost instantly to recognize him formally for his service. Michael tried to protest that Rex didn't need ceremonies or medals, but deep down he knew the truth. Rex's story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had been touched by his resilience, his sacrifice, and his unbreakable loyalty. A week later, the town square was filled with more people than Michael had ever seen gathered in one place. The mayor stood at the podium, flanked by officers in full dress uniforms, news cameras buzzing, reporters holding out microphones, and in the center sat a chair where Rex was carefully wheeled out, still recovering, but alive. His fur brushed his amber eyes, calm yet alert. Michael walked beside him, hand steady on the wheelchair, heart pounding with pride. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers mixing with tears as children waved signs that read, "Hero Rex" and "Thank you." The mayor gave a speech about bravery and loyalty, about the bond between man and dog, about the way one shepherd had reminded them all of what it meant to give everything for others. When she bent down to pin a shining medal to Rex's collar, the applause grew thunderous, but what happened next silenced them into awe. Rex, struggling against his weakness, shifted his weight until he slid gently off the chair, padding slowly across the stage with uneven steps. He bypassed the applause, ignored the cameras, and came to sit directly at Michael's feet, lowering his head, as if to say the glory was meaningless without the man who had stayed with him through every scar, every wound, every fight. Michael felt his throat tighten as tears blurred his vision. The crowd gasped, then rose to their feet in unison, the sound of sobbing and clapping blending together into something raw and powerful. Michael knelt down, his hand trembling as he stroked Rex's head, and he knew the medal was not enough, not for this dog, not for this partner. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up to his chest, unfastening his own badge. the symbol he had carried every day through suspicion and doubt, through trials as a black officer in a small town, through battles that had tested his spirit. He held it for a long moment, then bent low and fastened it onto Rex's collar beside the metal. His voice cracked as he whispered into the microphone, though it was meant only for Rex. "You're not a stray anymore. You're my partner, my family, always." The crowd erupted again, louder than before, many openly weeping strangers holding hands, children hugging their parents, tightly officers saluting as tears streamed down their faces. Michael pressed his forehead against Rex's, whispering, "We made it, buddy. We finally made it." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The world narrowed to a man and a dog who had both carried scars, both been doubted, both abandoned in their own ways, yet had found each other and refused to let go. That day, Rex's story became legend, not just in the precinct or in the town, but far beyond, as news reports carried images of the shepherd with 2 badges on his collar, the symbol of a bond forged not in glory, but in pain, sacrifice, and love. Weeks later, as Rex grew stronger and began walking beside Michael on patrols again, the town still spoke of that moment, of the way a broken dog and a weary man had reminded them of the power of loyalty. For Michael, it was never about medals or applause. It was about keeping the promise he had made that night on the pavement, pressing his hands over Rex's wound, begging him to stay alive. It was about proving that scars did not mean the end, that brokenness could still hold strength, that even the most abandoned soul could rise again if given love and purpose. As he walked through the streets with Rex at his side, heads turned, smiles broke across faces, and people waved not just at the officer, but at the partner, whose amber eyes still burned with pride. Michael thought of Henry Scott, of the badge Rex had carried for years, and he knew the shepherd had never stopped being loyal, had never stopped being a hero. The end. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think about Rex's journey. Was there a moment in the plot that struck you most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Your words keep these stories alive.